So forgive me for interrupting your story. Let's recap a little bit what you were saying about the World Trade Center documentary you were working on.
The Actuality Productions was, they had, for one of their Modern Marvels, and I think it was a special, they did in the year 2000, they did a special on the construction of the World Trade Center, which was just a really, for me, was just all these things that I wasn't aware of, because it, largely for me, it was these landmark structures in New York that, in my memory had always been there. So, but there was a really interesting story on how in the construction of them, and how, they initially people thought they were ugly, and they're like, what are they doing? And it took them a while to fill them, but eventually so it tracked them from the construction all the way to to landmark status they had, up until up until the 90s. And so then what happened after the events of September 11th, 2001, was that Actuality had all of this historic video, all the historic footage on the construction of the towers, and these interviews with people who worked at the towers for years and years, who had perished in the events of 9/11. So what came, and just coincidentally, I had been editing at Actuality, so I had the opportunity to work on this revised special that that Actuality did for the History Channel, and I believe the title was called "The World Trade Center: The Rise and Fall of an American Icon," and I believe, if I get the time right, it was only a few months after September 11th. It was very, very shortly thereafter that we were doing this. So for those of us who were adults at the time, that was just this extraordinary event. There's really no, in my lifetime, there was no real analog to this before or after. There've been significant tragic events, but it just had this really, for me, I'll speak for myself personally, just had this really significant effect on. And of course, for someone who didn't lose somebody personally in it. So we would come to do the show, and the producer Lee Schneider, I believe that's the story producer, the producer's name. He put together the script, and the show was going to look at the construction of the towers. We're going to again revisit the really, really fascinating, interesting story about the construction of the towers, but also look at structurally what occurred that caused the buildings to collapse and what went on. Not looking at anything other than that, just looking at those two stories. So. So you might say, oh, what's the big deal, Julian? You've cut these things together before. But, we were really, it was really in the wake of these events. So I felt some trepidation, like, well, how do you tell this story? And then at one point, Lee, the producer, we had the conversation of like, well, what are we gonna do for music? And, part of me is thinking, he's like, oh, you can't put music. I felt in some way music would trivialize the whole subject. But Lee had this idea. He said, I just have this, not as a more thematic idea than as an approach. But he said, to me, what occurs to me would be a perfect accompaniment with the sound of one child singing. And so I thought, the first thing that occurred to me was the score to the movie Glory, which featured I try to remember the name of it, the Harlem Boys Choir. I'm not sure if that's the name of the choir, but it was there was a choral group of young boys that were featured on that soundtrack, and also what that soundtrack was at once heroic and it was also really filled with melancholy, triumphant and sad at the same time. And for me, that entirely fit the subject. And why that, for me, and also just discovering the music, that also freed me up as far as, there's a story to tell, and there's a way we can tell it in appropriate and in a way that honors everyone involved. So if if you think a television show does, and I felt it did. But also it for me it distilled the conversations that editors, and I'll speak from an editor's point of view, editors can have with their collaborators. Wherein the collaborator doesn't have to say exactly what I want. For instance, Lee didn't have to say, he didn't have to write paragraphs and paragraphs of the kind of music he wanted. He just needed one image, and that opened up, for me, this whole other way of looking at it. And it happens with almost every project I have, particularly when we start from the very, when we're starting, is that how do you think we should do this? Well, I think, I'm thinking about, and then they'll come up with some kind of image or some idea that got them to that point. And we may not even include that, but it was the thing that got us started. The editor, the legendary editor, Walter Murch, in his book, In the Blink of an Eye, he tells a story about his collaboration. He was cutting Julia, and the very famous director, whose name I've forgotten at the moment, but you'll all remember now because you have Wikipedia. They were collaborating, and the director said, there's this one line that I think we can cut, we can take out. And Walter Murch stopped for a moment, because for him, he said, he remembered that was the line that the director had got him to want to do the movie. But they took it out, and it worked. It was fine. It was successful. But the takeaway lesson for him was that that was the one thing that got us going. That was the seed that got us going. And after we're there and we've got it, it's on its legs. We don't have to include it anymore. It doesn't have to be there. So they're always in the process of as an editor. There can be this one thing that makes me want to do this thing, or that I completely understand where the writers. I did this short film with Matt Nix, and he's been the showrunner now on what's it's a superhero one he's doing with Bryan Singer, but he also did Burn Notice, and so I did this short film with him. It was a satire. That was kind of had a theme like 1984, and there's this one line at the very, very end that it completely distilled everything that I got where he was getting to. So it was it was the more serious moment of the film, but for me it completely informed all the funny stuff that comes before it. And so the reason I bring that up is that for me that's what I always look for, is like what is the one valuable thing for you, my collaborator, if you're the director or the producer. What is that one valuable thing that is your mission statement, or the one thing that you're passionate about, that this whole enterprise is about? What is that? And if we're able to identify that and agree on that, that informs everything that I do. So in that particular piece about the World Trade Center, was that then we were for me, and I was able to then get in alignment with the producer, and also approach it in a way it informed everything that I was able to edit. And so another thing about that was also there was just the rigor that I had, because we were using new footage that was shot by the Port Authority, news footage, but rather than showing it in a exploitive way, I just really, both of us, all of us involved in it, we really wanted to show it in a way that was also informative, so that we made sure that rigorous about the timelines and the things that happened when they happened, and also trying to be as respectful as we can of all the people who were there. There was so that was. I always take my responsibility very, very seriously, but in that case, I recognize it was more than just having it be an engaging piece of entertainment. I knew that if anyone who was very personally involved in this, that they would look at that and they would recognize that we wanted to honor the events and not really seem like we're exploiting it in any way, and that was never from anybody that was ever the case. But you know, if I was selecting shots, I just felt, oh, is this shot the better one or this shot the better one? So it was as an edit experience, it was really a valuable one for me and a really rewarding one, because I think it was a very informative and very good show.
For what's your personal experience of 9/11? Where were you when it happened?
I was home. I wasn't working at the time, and you know, the it was also a point in my life wherein I felt like, why am I editing? And I don't mean to make this recollection necessarily about me, but I think it was there was the events, not to minimize them, but you know, for many I think Americans, there was a point wherein there was a significant part of time, a moment in time wherein I felt very helpless. I wanted to do something, and there was really, at that point, there was nothing I could do. But I recognized that the thing that I watched the events unfold on was television. And it's rather than it you know, because I've also been the guy that, you know, furniture is television is furniture, or television is just this thing that it's to trivialize it. But I think it also it has those of us who make television, and we have an extraordinary responsibility and an extraordinary opportunity to communicate these events. And so I watched it unfold at home, and it was in between shows, and I was watching it at home, and my wife had gone to work, and so I was at home alone, and so there was, you know, you're alone. And I felt like I want to do something, and there wasn't anything I could do. But what was valuable for me, was useful for me, was just being able to share this horrible experience with all, you know, millions of my fellow Americans on television. And I recognized then that, you know, wouldn't it be my biggest wish was that to go back in time, wherein, you know, we could just watch something that would be an escape. And then I recognize that for those of us who make entertainment, and again, not trivializing the horrible things that happen in life, but we can contribute something that's very valuable. There have been times in my life where some people very close to me are dying, and there was something really valuable in just being able to watch something where I was able to I vividly remember there's a moment where, you know, my mom was very sick, but I hadn't watched she was in the hospital, and I hadn't thought about television. Came in front of television, and Homer Simpson, I don't remember what Homer Simpson was doing. He was doing something, and it just made me laugh so hard, and that was just so important to me at that moment. So you know, when cutting The Amazing Race, and cutting other shows, I recognize that people take time out of their lives just to sit and watch what we did, and it was valuable for them for that. So again, I you know, like, I take it very seriously, and so for 50 years ago, I think it's 49 years ago tomorrow, as we tape this, Robert Kennedy was shot, and I remember it was my 4th birthday. And my mom was watching the television, and it was just this lock-off shot of the front of Good Samaritan Hospital. I mean, I didn't know at the time. It was just this one shot of this hospital. And my mom and my sister, she was, you know, they were watching this, and they were very serious about it. And I wondered what was going on. And my mom told me, you know, there's a man in there, and he's really sick. And but I vividly, I mean, it just vividly remember that was in that moment of time, that was something that they were able to share. Again, it's a moment wherein something horrible happens and there's nothing you can do, but there's something that we humans want to experience it together, and the experience that television does that for us. When I think about it, particularly what we're talking about right now, I've thought about that. What happens when these extraordinary events happen in our lives, that as we witness history, that's where we go to, and that's what we share. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but that was the first thing that came to me.
Absolutely.
The thing that we're again, like, we're able to share as a kind of community, because obviously I wasn't there. I was on a different coast on that day, but it didn't matter, in a certain way, because all of our lives were affected by it. But in some way, I felt that I was in some way witness to it.
So all of these modern Marvel shows, the World Trade Center and a lot of the other shows you did, were for History Channel.
Yeah.
I mean, not so much World Trade Center, because I assume that was a much broader audience than your typical History Channel show was. But are there choices that you make for a History Channel show versus a network show? Like, do you take your audience into consideration when you're editing for various cable channels? I
didn't experience this with necessarily the History Channel shows, but I heard this anecdotally, and it informed my editing. Was that if you're gonna show a World War II plane, you better have the right sound for that World War II plane, or you're gonna hear about it, because the modern Marvels audience apparently was a very informed one and knew their subject matter. So I took that to heart. So I didn't want to just fake it. I didn't want to be Mr. Hollywood coming, just put something in there. Just, it's fake. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Use a prop. It wasn't just my decision, but it was in all along the lines. The whole staff and the crew, they had taken that into consideration. But also in my part of that chain, I wanted to make sure that I didn't steal sound from one thing, as an example, sound from one thing and put it here. I just wanted to make sure that everything was right. And till today, I do that as well. On The Amazing Race, that we have, they're rigorous there as well. But I always wanted to double check and make sure that rigor. I guess that was really what I took away. And whereas, when I did Paradise Hotel, people didn't really care if we used the same full moon shot as a cutaway for like 4 months. It's always a full moon in Acapulco. I don't think anybody complained about that. So yeah, it was there. You get, depending on the subject matter. In that case, yeah, the modern Marvels, it was there was no place to hide. So yeah, there was a little bit more. It was like kind of for me, it was always like submitting a term paper. I just had to make sure like my bibliography was right, and I justified in all that in a different way, as opposed to Paradise Hotel. It's like, have them argue more. Yeah.
Excellent. I want to circle back to a show we skipped that you did a little earlier than that stuff. In '99, you edited some of A Baby Story.
Yeah.
So talk about that, how that came about.
That was from Pytown Productions I think that was for TLC, I believe.
AMC.
And it was so this was in terms of time and television, this was around the time of when the things called reality television were gaining attention. And what was really fascinating about that show was, how the show went was that you had a guaranteed human birth every episode. So they would follow the mom and the couple and introduce. We would introduce them, what their background story, and then the time leading up to before the birth, and then the birth. So it was very a very set format. But was one thing that I found really fascinating about that was that it's not a surprise. The experience is different for every woman, and for every couple, but specifically for every woman, the experience, even if they've had children before. So, how do we recognize that? How do we, show that in an interesting way? So for me, it was just I just found, again, if it's dealing with people and getting the privilege of seeing people, living their lives in really heady moments, for me that's the most fascinating thing to me. That's, to me, if I'm able to see that and appreciate that, and that's really the most interesting part of editing. So it was a really interesting show. Again, for that one, that is another one where you have a script, but you as an editor, you do choose how it plays out and see if it's clear, if you're able to get all the questions answered, and because sometimes the very first one I think I did was. The labor was protracted. They eventually had to do a cesarean section, so there was a complication that big. And so how do we show that in a way that's clear, and we're so it was to me, I thought it was a really interesting show.
Yeah. Now, do you have an assistant editor on a show like that?
There are so for many of the shows like this one and many of the reality shows, there's the editors who are editing the series, and then associate or assistant editors who to a large degree their responsibility to a large degree is keeping track of all the material that comes in, all the media, and dealing with any technical issues that might come up. So technically, the way a lot of the setups are now is that I'm at an Avid. Almost invariably, I'm at an Avid, even though there are a number of different programs that I'm at Avid Media Composer, and it's attached to a server, which has all of the material available for the whole series. So all the editors usually have access to the same material, and the assistants or the associate editors, they bring all that material into the server and make sure that it's have all the bookkeeping available, so we know where it came from, where it's going to, and it's really invaluable. Like the way having all of this material be available and be able to, for us editors to use it, and for them to turn around and have a show that's on the air. That's an extraordinary amount of technical work and effort that they do. I frequently say I have the easiest job in the building. I just have to come in and edit.
So the assistants don't do any cutting?
Ordinarily they don't. See, here's the tough thing, and an obstacle I didn't have to deal with because of the way I kind of snuck in the back door of music videos, is that a lot of folks who are interested in editing is a lot of times they'll need to go through being an assistant. And if they're really good at it, well, why am I going to give up a really good assistant and have you edit? So frequently many assistants they'll work as assistant, and they'll have to go elsewhere to start editing, or they may, depending, like some companies they'll have the opportunity to edit smaller segments and then work on to bigger segments. But it is kind of in speaking to some assistants, it can be a little difficult to make the jump. So and editing is, in my experience, really one is really able to only gain their strength or sharpen their abilities by doing it. And if you don't really have that opportunity to do it, it's not like you could go home and edit your own reality show. You know, you really need to get your hands on the material and edit it. So getting that opportunity, the experience doing it, at the same time doing your day job is really tough for them. So I know that that's pretty. I was fortunate. I was fortunate in that way. Yeah. So they're everywhere I go. They're just really this. The town is filled with really extraordinary people, really talented people who work really hard, in having, you know, this ship, you know, not from sinking. It's keeping all the material safe and clear. But saving clear, I mean by usable. Like, for instance, I have to know where this shot originated, and so I have to know where's the original material came from, and have all that bookkeeping in the background, so that I can just go and I can just cut, and so that is a great deal of work, invaluable. Yeah.
Do you have any assistants that you take with you from show to show, or are they just on the show and you work with who's there?
Yeah, yeah. See, that's another tricky thing too. Historically, particularly with film, editors would be able to have a relationship with their assistants because they would work closely together. And what goes on, particularly in reality, is the assistants are brought on by the staff. So they have more relationships with post coordinators or post producers than they do with an editor. So what's good for them is that then you're not bound by my whether I'm if I have a feast or famine year. They work with either a company or with the post producer, post supervisor. And so I don't have that kind of relationship with them. As an editor, I don't. Yeah.
So talk about a typical schedule for a weekly series like a baby story. How much footage do you get? How much time do you have for a episode?
Yeah, a baby story was very dissimilar to, let's say, a show like The Race or Amazing Race, or more of the reality shows that I do now. A baby story was shot over, maybe they shot it over, I'm trying to recall now, this was a while ago, maybe a period about 2 months or so, maybe about a month before the baby was due, and around that time, and then they would shoot one segment, an epilogue at the end after the baby's been home for a while. So and then all of that would be completed. It'd be broken down into a script, and then that would be a traditional. Television had this very traditional script format. Live television and news, wherein you have 2 columns. Where you have the one column you have the visual, and on the other column you have the voiceover or the soundbite, and so it was presented in that way. And I would get the script and I would just assemble that script, and then along the lines I would need to do what I needed to do so that it makes sense, the continuity to work, cut out the bad parts, have it be clear, and be to time or closer time. So so the amount of footage, however much footage they needed. So they would shoot an interview with a couple, and then that interview would be broken down and then formatted in the script. So I just needed to assemble that in that case, as opposed to a show like like The Amazing Race, wherein sometimes you would have. A couple years ago, I did a segment. It was where they were punting on the river in England, and I had 40 cameras. There were cameras on every single boat. There were 4 cameras on every single boat. We had cameras on the side on the banks of the river, and there was another camera. So there was all these cameras, and there's sometimes where you have just 1 camera. So depending on the moment, depending on what's happening, you'll have an extraordinary abundance of material, or just very little. And it's dependent. There was on The Amazing Race. There was this one moment where it was a detour. A detour is wherein the teams have the choice of doing 1 or 2 different activities. So they could either get to the end destination by either whitewater rafting or they could ride a bicycle. So one was treacherous, one was less treacherous, but took longer. So these two brothers, they decided to ride the bicycle. So they were in Argentina, and so most of the bicycle path went parallel to the road, so we could follow them riding the bicycle with the van. So, but there was one point where they're out of sight. But each of the teams, they also had these cameras mounted on their backs that had these little armatures where they would shoot their face of the person wearing the camera. One of those cameras went out on one of the brothers, but one of them stayed on. And at that very moment, they got a flat tire. They were out of range of the crew with the camera crew in the van, completely out of range. They could still get their wireless audio, but we couldn't see them at that one moment. There was one part of the road where they could see them. But we had that one camera of one of the brothers who had this little camera shooting him, and who had the perfect reaction. And because it had a material effect on the race, they actually, I believe this is the case, they fell behind, or at least they were in peril. They were possibly going to lose a position. We had to include that. So fortunately, we had that one little image, we had that one camera. And there are times when you have, there was one moment wherein a contestant was, they were firing, it sounds crazier than it really was. They were firing watermelons with a giant slingshot, and the slingshot got twisted up, and so the contestant, the woman, she pulled back the slingshot and it fired back in her face. So there was this image where we fortunately got, serendipity and the skill of our amazing camera folks. He was able to get this this large watermelon exploding on this woman's face, which was the perfect GIF. And so I always bring these up because we can have extraordinary amounts of footage, but ultimately it's the quality of the footage that determines how difficult or how easy piecing the show together may be. And different shows have different approaches. Like for instance, Baby Story is a very controlled, comparatively controlled reality show where you do an interview. There might be, a lot of times they had a baby shower, so you have that and you have reactions from the family. Even though you don't know what they're going to say, you kind of know what they're going to say. Oh, we're excited for them. We're happy, that kind of stuff. And then you have the birth. Whereas for the Amazing Race is, well, we know that they're leaving the starting line and we know where the finish line is, and they're going to do these couple things in between. All the other stuff, we don't know. But we're ready for whatever may or may not happen, and so completely different approaches, completely different results. But it's and each of them have their own challenges as far as piecing together and editing. And it always comes down to what are the people like? And how do they react to it? Because both of the, you're racing around the planet for $1 million, or you're having a baby. Two huge events for people, and how do they respond to that, and how do they react to that? And that's, for me as a viewer, again coming back to me as an audience, what do I want to see? I think they're both interesting. They're both compelling.
So another compelling show that you did in 2003 was Paradise Hotel.
Paradise Hotel.
So how did that one come about?
I had done. I think I had done the first season on The Amazing Race, and some of the producers on The Amazing Race subsequently went on to produce Paradise Hotel. Who was shot? It was we did the editing here in Los Angeles, in Hollywood at it was then Golden West, with KTLA down in Hollywood, the heart of Hollywood, across from the St. Moritz Hotel where Judy Garland stayed the first time she came to Hollywood. So it was old Hollywood, which as a television Hollywood fan, I love that stuff. I just love that stuff. So we were in there editing, but the show was shot at a resort in Acapulco, in Mexico. So but the show was on I want to say it was on twice a week on Fox. And the premise of the show was that we send I think it was an odd number of people down to the resort, and each week one person would be eliminated by a vote, and then would be replaced by another person that same day. So what happened was that there was a series of folks that were voted out, and the same number of folks would stayed in, and until we had this one oddball fellow come in, and the show just became amazingly interesting. So there was the team of producers who had worked on the race, and they were aware of me. They brought me on, but I think throughout the show was initially scheduled to last 12 weeks. It was so successful. I guess this was in 2003, so at the time it was a bit of a phenom. And subsequently, producers who were kids at the time told me, Paradise Hotel, that's what made me want to do reality television. It was supposed to be 12 weeks. It was extended to 16 weeks, so it lasted the whole summer. And as an editor, it was editing, 10 or more hours a day, 6 days a week. So it was really difficult. But because it was also on twice a week, so we edited maybe a day and a half or so, or a couple of days, depending on where it landed, before air. So it wasn't super tight, but it was, we had to cut these shows together. And one of the executive producers, Larry Barron, he kind of became a champion of mine. He liked what I did, and he gave me the nickname. He's the Terminator, I guess, because I guess I took less bathroom breaks. So I wanted to have this steely resolve. Because I was new to reality television, that kind of reality television where people were screaming and doing crazy things. So as opposed to having a baby or buying a house, so it was like this new exciting medium. So I just really wanted to make a compression. So I just I really wanted to, and apparently I did. So it got to the point where I was you're going to air the next day, say, and you have the show, and you needed to get it down to time. So you need to lock the show. So we would the producer Larry Barron and I we would go in an edit room at 8 in the morning, and we would pretty much be in the room locking the show, whittling it down, taking stuff out. And cutting it down to time, and then usually have who was Mike Darnell, who was then the head of alternative programming at Fox. He would come in later in the evening, and he would if he had any final notes, we would watch the whole show again. So we had about a 14-hour day or so every time we would lock, and which it sounds crazy, but I thought that was so much fun. Because you're on this tight schedule, and you're just kind of building the show, and these people doing crazy things, and then you get these final notes, and it just I felt like that's TV. It's not live television, but it's it's semi-live. So it was a lot. It was very difficult. It was but as I think a lot of people who were, I think humans like to be challenged, and when you're challenged and you see the results, and then your results are appreciated, it's an extraordinary experience. So there's so many people that I work with, and people are in this room who work really hard, and it's because it's really rewarding to do that. So I have fond memories of that very crazy show.
The show was created by Mentorn for a UK production, and then they had various versions around the country. Did you ever go back and watch any of those international versions not even this show, just any show like this?
No. An interesting thing that I observed specifically with that show was that it was because of the time, frame of having to get the show done, it was though a lot of the story producers and show producers, it was if there was an opportunity to pursue something, we did it. The cast really let us know where the show wanted to go. So on the one, I didn't watch, like frequently I'll if I'm going to work on a show that's been on before, had some previous iteration, I'll go back and I'll watch the shows just to know what's going on. But in this case, it was, we're doing a show, come in on Saturday and we'll see what happens. And so it changed a little bit. It used to have a component where they would do a studio segment here in Hollywood, and eventually that got phased out. And then so it got to be a case where the show was exclusively at the resort, and the eliminations were there, and then some other cast members that were brought in because it wasn't nobody was really competing for a prize. There was just it was a different kind of dynamic within the cast. It was just really about, for them, our impression was, for them it was just the opportunity to be on television and be in a resort. That was your job. And who wouldn't want to do, your early 20s, who would want to do that with your friends? So if somebody comes in and there was this one moment, for me it was almost like this biblical moment, this prodigal comes in and he gets rid of the favorite son, Zach, and he goes, and everybody hates him, and then he kind of takes over. It was incredible. But being able to see humans be humans was just, it was, and with a good dose of alcohol, it was fascinating, and it wasn't, by no means was it History Channel stuff, but it was just really fun yeah, it was fun to watch. By getting back to what you said, I think what was another great thing for me as somebody working on the show was that watching everybody in story and the producers really just have the cast tell you where it's going, and because it was the one odd fellow, the odd guy. Everybody on the show was these they could be models. They were beautiful people. But there was this one young woman who kind of kept to herself. She wasn't part of the group. And then ultimately she befriended this one guy who got voted in, who was just this kind of gawky, goofy guy. And he persisted, he stayed. And so the two outsiders kind of teamed up. And so it was just really interesting to watch, wherein, it wasn't so much, it was unpredictable. It was a twist that evolved organically. And so again, I say as an audience member, I want to see that. And so the very satisfying thing about that was just seeing the producers and seeing all of us were just able to let the cast take you where they wanted to go.
So there really isn't any manipulation in the editing to, throw the viewer off from what's going to happen. It seems like that's sort of a typical expectation in dating
Typical,
shows.
Isn't it? Those editors. Who do they think they are? There is always I think the responsibility to tell the story in a compelling way. So not dissimilar from telling you a joke, is to use a schematic. Take my wife, please. Okay, so it's a horrible joke, but we all kind of understand that the please is a punchline because it's a surprise. You're going to say, take my, why? But once I start explaining it, it becomes even less funny. Any joke you explain, it's even less funny. So if there's no surprise, if there's no novelty in the way that the narrative is told, it becomes far less interesting. So if there is some sort of twist or something that really did happen, when you're piecing the show together, you make the decision, well, when do we show that? When do we tell you? And so with anything, like when do I tell you, even if it's not a surprise or a twist, when The Amazing Race has a lot of moments wherein, particularly in the beginning of an episode, wherein there's a lot of technical stuff. Somebody got on a certain plane, somebody missed a bus, somebody passed somebody in a cab, oh, somebody didn't read their clues. There's a lot of business that needs to be told in order for everything else to happen. For them to be crying on the mat in front of Phil at the end, you need to know all this other stuff. Like, why are they crying? Oh, because they made a mistake here. There's all this other Act 1 kind of stuff that has to happen. So the question is, well, when do we tell the audience that? The perfect point to tell the audience that is that when just at the moment the audience is going to ask the question, oh, did they get on the bus? Oh, no, they missed the bus. Similarly, with a twist, is that what would be the most interesting spot to reveal the twist would be, oh, when the question comes up. So as opposed to as opposed to the producers and the editors, everyone telling you that beforehand, there's no surprise, there's no novelty in it. The joke doesn't work, the story doesn't work. If your funny uncle who comes to town, he tells a story in a certain way, and it reveals things in a certain moment, he knows it'll get a reaction out of you. The way he's always done it. It's not the same, but it's not dissimilar from that. So there are shows that shows that I've worked on, certainly not The Amazing Race, but other shows wherein there is manipulation. And for me, as an audience member, it's less satisfying because then it feels like a manipulation. Well, it's like, well, okay, wow, big surprise. It's like, I didn't see that coming. Usually the manipulations you see coming. Usually they're like melodrama. It's like, I'm twisting my mustache and I have the deed. Oh no, I get caught. That you saw that coming. But whoever's doing the show, I think, trust the game, whatever the game is. If it's either being voted off the island, or if it's getting to the checkpoint and to the pit stop on time, or if it's getting the rose, whatever the game is, trust the game, and then trust that you cast well, and the people will do what they need to do, and then our obligation in actually formatting all those events into a digestible show, we reveal it at a moment that is the right time, so that it's the most satisfying. That you're not confused. Like if I leave some detail out and things are happening, and you're no longer watching the show. You're, as a viewer, you're asking, well, what happened? Why are they? I thought they were going to do. Wait, that's bad. But if we answer that question right when you have it, okay, that question answered. We can move on. So there are times when it's a manipulation. When it's done well, I think is we reveal it in a novel way, kind of like a great story is told, or like a joke is told, but it's not a manipulation. It's not fake.
Right.
Is that
absolutely?
Yeah.
Absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you edit the trailers at the end for the coming up next week on?
The next on.
Yeah.
Actually, we were talking about assistants. For The Amazing Race, that was an opportunity for assistants to edit, because it was comparatively short. So they were able to take the time to do it, and there was a format to it, but there's a skill to it as well. There were times when I did piece them together, but in recent years it was assistants who had the opportunity to cut those.
And how many editors work on a show like Paradise Hotel, and how is it divided up? Is it by episode, or?
I think Paradise Hotel ultimately had 40 editors. I had the opportunity to be there for all 16 weeks, but some folks will come in for a few days or a day or a few days. And in those cases, what would happen was you have a time frame. Big Brother is not dissimilar in this regard, is that you have a time frame wherein these certain events happen. So for instance, you have the show number 1. Okay, all the events of show number 1 happen. So we're gonna have show number 2. So basically shows number 2 is gonna include all the events that happen in between then. But you can't really approach that as one huge segment. So you follow different stories. You follow the stories of a couple, or rivals, or about a rivalry that starts, or about a relationship that starts. Whatever goes on, you follow that particular story. And so it may be a development that pays off weeks down the road, or maybe something that happened, that doesn't pay off. You don't necessarily know that if you're cutting along, with it. But it might be interesting in that between that one interval. So you as an editor, you'll receive the notes from a story producer who's been watching the events as they go on, and then they'll say, okay, this particular story is distilled best in this one scene, or this is a really good scene. So you might have somebody falling in love, or you might have somebody arguing, or you might, or somebody might tell a lie to somebody in order to have them, to play the game. So that one scene will need to be cut. Or what may happen, particularly in those shows, is that those two people might have multiple conversations over this interval. So particularly Big Brother, it's never day or night in the house. It's always the same. So you're able to cut together maybe conversations that happen over like a 5-hour period, telescope them in a way so that it's one conversation. So you get the thrust of what happened between those in that story and piece them together. So then as an editor, I come in and then to do my shift, and then my responsibility is to cut that scene. So then I'll have all of this material from that time period pieced together and this is what we need that scene to say. But it's not a manipulation, it's like what did happen, but we need to digest it in a way that it reflects the reality. Kind of using the hieroglyphic example again, is that you just squeeze it all together and then it kind of makes sense. And at the same time, hopefully it's kind of dramatic, or something happens, or it's kind of snarky, or it's funny. Appreciate the entertaining elements in it, because honor the casting. These people were cast for a certain reason. Why did we bring this person on? Because he always does this, because she always does that. And so it's like as a screenwriter, it's like, what is my character's most dominant trait? What is the trait that gets my character in trouble? For us, we need to recognize that, is that, oh, he's going to do that thing he does, and then so I'll always remind the viewer of that. So it's like, so we're always advancing the scene. So it doesn't, if sometimes what might happen is I go in at the end of my shift, I cut together a scene and it's flat. It's not really interesting. And a lot of times what happened on Big Brother, for instance, is that, the night before the show airs, something happens. Sometimes I would work the shift at night on Big Brother, and there was a monitor there, and then, I'm editing away, and all of a sudden, like around 11:30 or 12, you hear all, the monitors go off, and there's like some argument breaks out, or a party breaks out, something happens that would be like notable. So a lot of these scenes that we cut together, they might go by the wayside. Oh, now we're just going to redo this and cut it, and it goes on, and it replaces that. So, the editors will, particularly those shows where you're cutting towards one particular episode, you'll piece them all together, but you might have one scene, and then those will ultimately all be composited into an episode. Right. As opposed to a show like The Amazing Race, wherein for instance, if I'm doing a show, say show 2, I'll be assigned say a detour or a roadblock. So I'll have a month to cut that together, to work into doing that, to piece that episode together. And then it'll go into the episode where another editor would piece together other parts of it. So again, just a different approach.
So when you're cutting like a roadblock, do you cut that roadblock with every couple that's going through that roadblock?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So if they have to build this table, or they need to bungee jump off of this one thing. Like every team that comes through there, I'll piece it together. The challenge is that, particularly some of the earlier shows where you might have 10 or 11 teams doing something, is that you want to avoid repetition. You don't want to show this. It's like, oh, the first time you see somebody bungee jump, oh my gosh, look at that. Oh, the fourth time you see it, it's like, okay, enough already. So how do you assemble it in such a way so that it doesn't feel that way? Oh, well, then get back to how does the human respond to it? Does somebody have, like, for instance, in season 29, this season that just completed, the eventual winner, he had like me, he has a huge fear of heights. It's irrational. We know it's irrational. It's like, I know I'm not going to fall, but if I'm at a height, the thing in my brain, there's a voice in my brain saying, it's like, you're gonna die. It's just irrational, and I recognize that, which is fascinating. So, but then you have a guy who does extreme sports, who loves this stuff. So it's like, how, you have an opportunity then to contrast the two approaches. And if there are people people in the audience like me who fear heights, show the heights, just freak everybody out. I'm watching the material, I'm cutting it together for weeks, and it kind of still, I get that feeling, and it's great. It's horrible. It feels horrible. Great. Or folks who really love that, embrace that, and just love the thrill of doing that, show that as well. So instead of it being the same activity over and over again, what I have the opportunity then is to appreciate how those people are responding to it. Or if a team is doing really well, they're the first ones there. Oh, it's great, it's fun. If they're last and they think they're going to be eliminated, this is horrible. You have to. So it's dire. So appreciate their emotional state then as well. So that's what has it be interesting, piecing them together. That's what you would do, either roadblock or any of the activities they would be doing. They have to complete.
Excellent. Well, we want to dive into The Amazing Race, but let's take a quick break and then we'll...
That's a tease.
Coming up next on...